Welcome to Words of Hope, our 12th edition, can you believe, and one that comes at a time when hope and positive thinking were never more needed. In this very special focused edition, we'll get that from Pastor Patrick Johnson, our Ministerial Association Secretary, although how he manages to get hope out of the doom and gloom of the prophet Amos, I'm not really sure. Stay tuned to find out. But first, in those moments when I felt a little bit down this past summer, there's one particular Facebook friend that I've turned to who always seems to have the ability to cheer me up. In the midst of a pandemic and maybe with too much time on his hands, Ken Burton, perhaps best known as the conductor of the London Adventist Chorale and often seen on the BBC's Songs of Praise, took time out in a new role as a stand-up comedian and a songster, albeit with some absolutely atrocious puns. However, between coronavirus and now the tragic death of George Floyd, he's also shown a serious and moving side in the midst of tragedy. So, how does it work? Puns, jokes, music, and tragedy. I caught up with him on Zoom to discover more.
Well, I've inherited that from my father, and when he passed 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, I made it a vow to continue with what I call the punishment.
You're punished.
As a creative, my mind is continually thinking of things. And sometimes I might just hear a word, maybe in a supermarket or something that a family member says, and then instantly out of that comes a pun. And then I feel, well, I mustn't keep this to myself. I must share it, because in a time when we've just been hearing continual bad news, I think it's really important that we balance that with occasionally giving our brains that break and allowing some of the feel-good hormones to be released. I think it's so necessary to have that balance without diminishing the severity of the situation, of the seriousness of what we're going through.
You've been creating this stuff and it takes a lot of time. I mean, you've been doing music, you've been doing stand-up comedy, although you were sitting down. Why does it seem so important? We haven't seen this side of you before so much on social media.
I know, well, lockdown's given me the opportunity to do it. And to be honest with you, I have ideas continually being generated in my head all the time. It's just activity in my brain all the time. And because I haven't always had the time to see some of these things through, then I've not been able to always carry through with my thoughts. But now, because of lockdown, I've been able to actually put some of my ideas onto video, and I've just got the bug really just to do it. I literally get up in the morning and an idea comes to me. An idea came to me one morning to maybe just share some thoughts in a devotional and sing a song at the end of it, share a scriptural text, because I think this is an important opportunity that which we now have.
A thought occurred to me this morning, and maybe I'm not the first person to think of this, but Jesus was a cross between two thieves. The Apostle Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, the reference being 1 Corinthians 5 verse 21, says that Jesus, who knew no sin, became sin. He took on sin.
Evangelism is really something which burns within me, and connecting to people in relevant ways, connecting to people is really sort of my thing. So I think this is a great opportunity that I had to actually share different things. And I guess I'm probably tapping into Jesus' method in appearing just to be a normal human being and just getting people, as it were, on side, making people laugh and saying, this is a normal human being who is wise to the ways of the world, but yet when I can bring them something spiritual, I hope that it's something that they will also embrace as well.
Obviously, in the last 10 days or so, things have got a lot more serious, and your postings have got more serious with them. And it's a difficult subject that has has gone around the globe and is reverberating in all sorts of different directions. This issue of Black Lives Matter, we've seen that murder, which has triggered memories of other painful events in recent years, and of course the painful events over a 400-year history of slavery and coming out of slavery. And I'm just wondering what your view is on that at the moment. I know you're getting involved in a concert, but what's your take on what's happening at the moment?
I decided to let me have a look at what the fuss really is. And then I realized, oh, this is what happened. This is what happened. Then I found myself getting obviously quite emotionally connected to the whole story. And it's not the fact that somebody died in police custody, because that's happened before. But I think when you're reading about the graphic detail, when you're reading about somebody calling out for their mother or losing bladder control or whatever, and then you realize, you're entering as much as you can into the spirit of the actual event itself, and realizing that this is something quite serious. Getting emotionally involved, just got me thinking about really, relations. I mean, I'm married to a Spanish, and I've always been about how do we work together and how do we show each other as a human race dignity and value. And I've been sort of equal in my condemnation and in my speaking out about issues like this, as I have of what I feel we need to address within our churches, and where I do feel that sometimes that they actually put on a service and they present themselves in a way which speaks mostly to the majority of the congregation, whereas I really feel that we need to be thinking always carefully about making sure that whatever we say, regardless of what the makeup of our congregation is, who's in the majority, who's in the minority, that we always present things in a way where we're actually thinking about the totality of the human race. I've looked at a lot of stuff. I've watched a lot of videos, not just on George Floyd, but on other things as well, trying to get, again, a sense of history and trying to make sense of what's going on here, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what's going on. And I kind of understand when people say, for example, all lives matter, not quite understanding that Black Lives Matter doesn't mean only Black Lives Matter, but it means Black Lives Matter too. So in being part of conversations and so forth, I'm seeing lots and lots of different attitudes coming out, some of absolute anger, which I don't feel is necessarily the right way to go if it's only anger. I mean, I use 3 words: diatribe, dialogue, and dialogue, as in when dialogue begins to die out. I think it's important to have the expressions of anger. Yes, one must say enough is enough, and we can't go on this way as a human race. But I think then that's got to move from that place of anger, which can only just mean we're just throwing out insults at each other and so forth, and it leads to hate and perpetuating the situation, not managing and moving the situation on. Then we've got to move to dialogue, which is the honest and open dialogue where we share. Both sides, I think, need to share. And when I say both sides, I'm talking about a mentality. Dialogue means that we have an honest and open conversation about the facts. And then I think dialogue, we need to make sure that the dialogue doesn't die down or doesn't die out, but that we are actually actively thinking of ways that we can go forward. And it can't just be, let's just put a strategy in place or legislation in place, affirmative action or having your quota of representation from, black and minority, which I don't like that term, black and minority ethnics or whatever. I don't like that term at all. But having your quota of people, I think it's not fixed by that as such. I think we've got to have a dialogue because these things start in the mind, and as the Bible says, we have to, it's a renewal of our mind that we become, transformed in our outward behavior.
The renewal of the mind is important. The Bible is full of love. It's also full of looking at the downtrodden and seeing how you can raise them up. Jesus talking to a Samaritan woman, unheard of, impossible.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the moment, the challenge I'm finding maybe, and I'm like you, I've got a cross-cultural marriage, and yet it's very difficult for me to say a word at the moment that might not be misinterpreted in one way or another in this specific context, even though people that know me, they know where I'm coming from.
I think we've got to just be mindful of, of the different sensitivities that exist out there. But I think we've also got to be able to express ourselves honestly. But I think what we need to do is try our hardest to temper it every 2 or 3 phrases, saying, look, I understand this may not be the way, or this is the way I perceived it. I may be wrong, I'm open. So we've got to be open to hear the other side. We've got to be open to hear different perspectives and understand that it's not a simple, sort of binary issue. There are lots of variables. There's lots of complexities in this, and life is like that. It's just not like it's this or that. And we've got to understand. There's an understanding that we have as a people about our own history, whether it's a sense of whether it's the good parts of our history or the bad parts of our history. We've got a sense of importance or a sense of self, sort of effacing. I think it's really, really important for us to understand that there are different understandings out there. People are at different stages of the journey, but acknowledge that as we share our point. Just try to have that dialogue and get people to see. Dialogue means that there's more than one person. It's not monologue. Conversation, means with. So the idea is that you are listening. The idea is that you are sharing, you are being honest, but you are also saying to people, we have an understanding of the different sensitivities, the different dynamics of any situation. So please understand that and listen slowly.
And if we go back to a little thought from Aristotle, he said, we all want to make friends quickly, but sometimes it takes some time and effort to develop that relationship. And maybe in this process, yes, this horrible, tragic death has been a catalyst for something, and we hope and pray it will be a catalyst for something good, but it's something where everybody has to work at it, yes, and be sensitive, but not just let it go as that's another event, and in a few months or a few years something else happens and then we all get angry again.
As Christians, I would say, as an Adventist Christian, it's incumbent upon us to recognize that if we are teaching that we are created in the image of God, that means we are saying we believe that every human being has worth. If we're teaching the story of salvation of somebody who's saying, I've become nothing, so that, you might have life, have abundantly and eternally, that for our sakes he became poor, that we might become rich. If we're believing really the gospel story, then we would make this, I think, one of our primary aims, really, to deal with this at the present moment in time. And then a church of prophecy. What do the prophets talk about in Isaiah and Jeremiah? It's justice. I was reading it yesterday, and just from a justice lens, sometimes I like to read scripture and say, what does it say about this or say about that? And I'm reading the prophets again about justice, and a number of times God says, your worship, your fasting, everything becomes unacceptable if it's not accompanied by the simple way that you treat people.
Thank you, Ken, and much to ponder on there. And as we mentioned earlier in the interview, Ken is organising a live concert on Facebook and YouTube on Sunday, the 28th of June. To find out more, visit musicalmarch.co.uk. Now, Ken mentioned prophetic messages, and it seems our own Patrick Johnson has one as well. He's been studying the Book of Amos and discovered that it actually has a very relevant message for today.
One of the things that's really important as you get to know a person is to find out the things that they dislike. When my wife first got to know me, one of the first gifts she gave me was a box of chocolates. Now that's normally a pretty safe gift to give to a person, but I'm one of those really weird, rare people that don't like chocolates. So she found out about that pretty soon. I was reading recently in the Book of Amos, and actually in the Book of Amos, my impression is that it's telling us things that God dislikes. The way in which he does this, he uses what's known as graduated sayings. It's a kind of idiom. It's a way of expressing something in a very Hebrew way. An idiom, is it's a collection of words that on their own don't make much sense, but together they have a specific meaning. So, for example, if I say, tonight I'm going to let my hair down, and you think, what kind of hair is he going to let down? It's got nothing to do with the actual hair. It really just means that I'm going to be relaxing and enjoying myself. Well, here in Amos, what's being used is a certain formula. The formula is, for 3 sins of Damascus, even for 4, I will not turn back my wrath. It's a kind of idiom. It's a way of God saying, here are things that I dislike. And I found 4 things here in the book of Amos that God seems to dislike. The first one, it's a lack of human compassion. Here he talks about Damascus. What is it he dislikes about what Damascus has done? Because she threshed Gilead with sledges having iron teeth. He speaks against Gaza because she took captive whole communities and sold them to Edom. He speaks against Edom and says, because he pursued his brother with the sword, stifling all compassion, because his anger raged continually and his fury flamed unchecked. And he talks about Ammon, and he says, because he ripped open the pregnant women of Gilead in order to extend his borders. God dislikes a lack of human compassion. As you will have seen the horrific killing of George Floyd, it's an expression of lack of human compassion. And I think here Amos is telling us God dislikes those kinds of things. The second thing that we find that God dislikes here is in chapter 5, that God dislikes injustice. Chapter 5, verse 11, you trample on the poor and force him to give you grain. Therefore, though you have built stone mansions, you will not live in them. Though you have planted lush vineyards, you will not drink their wine. For I know how many are your offenses and how great your sins. You oppress the righteous and take bribes, and you deprive the poor of justice in the courts. Injustice is also something that God dislikes. A third thing that God dislikes, though, is complacency. Here in chapter 6, verse 1, woe to you who are complacent in Zion, and to you who feel secure on Mount Samaria, you notable men of the foremost nation, to whom the people of Israel come. And then he gives a description of what they're like in verse 4. You lie on beds inlaid with ivory and lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fatted calves. You strum away on your harps like David and improvise on musical instruments. You drink wine by the bowlful and use the finest lotions, but you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. In other words, having a prideful complacency about other people who are suffering is also something that God dislikes. And I think the final thing that I found here that God dislikes is a pretentious kind of piety. Here in chapter 5, beginning at verse 18, it says, woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Why do you long for the day of the Lord? That day will be darkness, not light. It will be as though a man fled from a lion only to meet a bear, as though he entered his house and rested his hand on the wall only to have a snake bite him. Will not the day of the Lord be darkness, not light, pitch dark without a ray of brightness? Why? Why would that be the case for people looking forward to see God? Here's what he says. I despise your religious feasts. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. God dislikes pretentious piety. What he does like is action from his people. And as we're living in a world with so much injustice, with so much lack of compassion, with complacency, let us be people that reflect what God is like. Let us be those kinds of people who seek justice for people, whatever situation they may be, who seek righteousness and spread the righteousness of God. May God bless us and help us to be people that reflect what He is like.